Well, fuel costs could go down if we could access some shale gas. Large parts of the southeast could be exploited for the controversial practice of fracking, according to the government's energy department. The dots on the map show areas where gas has been previously drilled for and which could become potential shale gas production sites. Fracking, which involves pumping water and chemicals into shale rock at high pressure to extract gas, was temporarily banned when it was blamed for causing mini earthquakes near Blackpool last year. But in his autumn statement, the Chancellor announced a consultation on tax incentives for this unconventional form of energy production. So are we all going to have to get used to fracking on our doorstep? Well, Rosie Rechter from East Kent Against Fracking joins us from our Dover studio. Presumably you were quite unhappy, Rosie, when you heard the Chancellor's comments in the autumn statement.
Extremely unhappy. I was prepared for it, but I was hoping against hope that he wouldn't go that far. Why is he flogging the dead horse of fossil fuels instead of looking to the future? I think he's gambling recklessly with all our futures.
Well, I'll hazard a guess at why he's doing it, because if those shale gas reserves could be accessed, they'd give us a lot of cheaper fuel. As we've just been discussing on the programme, rising fuel costs are putting people into real poverty.
I challenge it being a cheaper fuel. Another thing he said in his autumn statement was that he was looking for regulations that were simple and safe. It's an extremely complex procedure which can be highly dangerous, and it needs complex regulations and a legal framework to protect us all. And at most, it will last 20 years. I think it's madness.
The government's not going to put people's lives at risk. He's promising safe regulation. What would it take for you to accept that exploiting shale gas reserves is worthwhile?
I don't think anything would convince me of that. It's going in completely the wrong direction. We should be developing renewable energy, which will last forever, not a mere 20 years. That's before I get on to the damage it can do to everybody who lives anywhere near it.
Well, let's remind us briefly then of the concerns that you have about fracking.
Well, looking at what's happened in America, and it's very difficult to get convincing reports from there, but in one region alone they had 1,000 cases of contamination of water last year. So we're worried about our water, we're worried about the quality of life. I think we need 1,000 truckloads for the drilling of each single well, and on average you have 6 to 8 wells per pad. So you will have constant noise, you will have congestion on the roads, you will have air pollution, possibly contamination of the water, possibly earthquakes, and it's all very well for people to say it's no worse than a lorry going past the door. Several people suffered subsidence to their properties in the very small earthquake in Blackpool, and one of the drilling rigs was damaged.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's a long list. We'll leave it there for now.
I could go on.
Raymond Hishti, I mean, she did paint an alarming picture. 1,000 truckloads per well, the contaminated water, the earthquakes. It's hard to justify going ahead with this.
Well, I think what we've got to do is make sure that we do everything we can to reduce energy prices for our constituents around the country. This is a way which could achieve that. For example, the Royal Society of Engineering and the Environmental Committee have already looked at this, and they say the concerns that have been raised can be covered and dealt with. And I think, on that basis, we have to make sure that we do everything we can to help that.
For example, risk though, isn't it?
I was going to say, can you be convinced, Steve Bassam?
Well, I'm a sceptic. I mean, I think Rosie's got a lot going for her arguments. I think the government has got itself into a real pickle with its energy policy. We've not got the balance right, clearly, between renewables and non-renewables. And fracking, I think, does smack of a bit of desperation.
Well, can I just come back in on that, actually? I think on the basis that, I think we don't need any lessons from Labour on energy because of not making those decisions when Ed Miliband was the Secretary of State for Environment. and
well,
energy.
It's not true. We had a massive expansion of renewables when Labour was in government.
We've now got to go for. But I think on this, before it goes ahead, there has to be a planning application. Then it has to be looked at by the Environmental Agency. Only then can it be given permission to go ahead. So I say, yes, of course there are concerns, but those bodies, the Society of Engineering and the Environmental Committee have said concerns can be dealt with.
OK, Steve, I mean, both areas that you represent, Brighton and Hove and the Medway towns, have high areas of fuel poverty. I mean, the seductive argument here is that we could have a cheap and secure fuel source.
Well, I think it's the security that's the issue, and I think Rosie's touched on it. There may be circumstances where it's appropriate and right to consider exploiting this sort of energy, but I'm not sure that we've yet got to that point. I'm not sure or convinced that the government's put the right regulatory framework in place. Okay. It's fragmented between the local authority, the HSE, the Environment Agency. There's a lack of cohesion in policy here, and that's really troubling.
But if all that can be overcome, and let's assume the government doesn't want to put lives at risk in the exploration of shale gas, then given what we've been talking about today, about fuel poverty, about rising costs, this is surely worth exploring, isn't it?
Look, I think you've got to follow the science with these things, and that's by and large our approach. But I don't yet think that the science is perfected on this, and I think there are some really troubling questions that have not yet been answered. And I'm sorry to say this, but the idea that the way of selling it is to go through fuel poverty is not the right way. Renewables is the way forward for us, and I don't think we're yet exploiting that to the optimum.
I think in the energy bill we have looked at the renewables, but I think this is in addition to it. For example, independently, not the Chancellor, not what I say, the Environmental Committee says this is the right way forward. Other agencies which deal with this say this is the right way forward. We as a government have cut fuel poverty. For example, the petrol price have been cut, and I think this would be another way. The duty. This would be another way.
Energy prices have gone up by about a third in the last 2 years.
I was going to say,
how can you possibly justify that?
We could carry on, gentlemen, but I'm afraid we have to leave that one there for now.